Long before the June 30th, 2000 release of the big-budget Warner Brothers movie starring the likes of George Clooney, Mark Wahlberg, John Hawkes, John C. Reilly, and Diane Lane, there was a real fishing boat called the Andrea Gale, and it really did hit the perfect storm. Hi, I'm Chris May, host of This Day in Weather History, a podcast from the Weather Network in Canada. This week is brought to us by Tourism Ireland, where 3,000 years of Halloween history awaits you. Be with us tomorrow, Saturday the 31st, for a special Halloween episode to learn about the ancient origins of Halloween in Ireland, while looking at some standout weather events around the world that either helped or hindered ghosts and goblins on this special spooky day. On October 30th of 1991, the so-called perfect storm hit the Atlantic, producing remarkably large waves along the New England and Canadian coasts. This day in weather history. This is not a hurricane story like we have covered before here on this podcast. This is something so intense that it actually caused an historical decision to be made. That's coming up. First, let's go back to the beginning, only 3 days prior. It was October 27th when Hurricane Grace formed near Bermuda and moved toward the coast of the southeastern United States. 2 days later, on the 29th, Hurricane Grace was on the move due north when it ran into a rather massive low-pressure system that was diving south from Canada. These two systems merged into one monster storm, and this is where things went nuts. The clash of systems took place over the Atlantic Ocean, one being a deep low and the other being an actual named hurricane. And by the time October 30th rolled around, this day in weather history, there were ferocious open water waves rising heights of 40 feet to 80 feet. That's 12 meters to 24 meters. Those are actually measured by buoys and other means, but there were still other unconfirmed reports estimating waves that got actually closer to 100 feet. That now is over 30 meters. The damage caused by these enormous waves was widespread throughout the entire region. So imagine this, extensive coastal flooding close to its epicenter along coastal Massachusetts. But similar damage was also reported as far south as Jamaica and as far north as Newfoundland, Canada. So while this storm was developing, there was a 70-foot fishing boat named the Andrea Gale in the Grand Banks of the North Atlantic on a fishing mission for swordfish. The last anyone heard from the crew of the Andrea Gale was on October 28th, but the storm was in full flight, so no rescue was attempted, and radio communication was tried again and again, but to no avail. The storm itself, meanwhile, continued into October 31st, churning northeast toward the Canadian Maritime provinces, and because of the date, it was nicknamed the Halloween Storm. But the next day, on November 1st, when the fishing boat did not return to port on their scheduled day, it was then that rescue teams were given the all-clear to be sent out. Tragically, the fishing boat Andrea Gale and its 6-member crew were lost in the storm. David Sullivan and Robert Shatford of Gloucester, Massachusetts, William Tyne, Dale Murphy, and Michael Moran of Bradenton Beach, Florida, and Alfred Pierre of New York City were never recovered, but they are forever immortalized. The week-long search for the Andrea Gale and a possible cause of its demise were documented in Junger's book, which became a national bestseller and a major motion picture that I told you about off the top. But our storm's story is not over yet. On November 2nd, while the search was underway for the Andrea Gale, this storm made landfall along the Nova Scotia coast, then continuing northeast over the Gulf Stream waters. It made another entry into the history books when it again transitioned into another hurricane. But that was enough for the National Hurricane Center. They made the decision not to name this new storm for fear that it would only alarm and confuse local residents. So history was made when it re-intensified under these circumstances, as it was a very unusual occurrence. But history was also made because it was only the 8th hurricane not given an official designated name since the naming convention of hurricanes began back in 1950. The term the perfect storm is used colloquially to describe when more than one unique circumstance comes together to make something happen that is far bigger than its individual parts. The deep low with a ton of energy hitting the sweet spot of a hurricane over the perfect area of the Atlantic waters redefined forever the term the perfect storm. this day in weather history. Tomorrow is October 31st, and we have made it to our very first podcast special. This week has been brought to us by Tourism Ireland, where 3,000 years of Halloween history awaits you. Happy Halloween! So, for tomorrow's special episode, we will learn about the ancient origins of Halloween in Ireland while looking at some standout weather events around the world that happened on this spooky day. It's our Halloween special, brought to you by Tourism Ireland. Tomorrow on This Day in Weather History, with me, your host, Chris May.
Happy Halloween.